Hi. Welcome to Nurse Ratchet, where we don't sugarcoat the messy stories that leave a mark. We break down the people, the chaos, and what sticks with us after. 30 years ago, a quiet, historic town in Tasmania became the scene of unimaginable violence. On that day, 35 people lost their lives and 18 others were wounded. The man responsible, Martin Bryant, is now serving 35 life sentences with no possibility of release. This tragedy stands as Australia's deadliest mass shooting and sparked sweeping gun law reforms that changed the nation forever. But this isn't just a story about one day. It's a story about a broken system, suspicious deaths, inappropriate relationships, and a man who was written off as harmless until it was too late. Today, we're walking through Martin Bryant's entire life story, from his childhood in Hobart to the moment everything exploded at Port Arthur. This is the complete breakdown.
Welcome to Nurse Ratchet Podcast. Yet again, my name is Georgia, and today we have...
Before we talk about Martin Bryant, we need to understand the place where this tragedy unfolded. Port Arthur wasn't just any historic site. It was a symbol of Australia's colonial past, and it holds a complicated history. Before Port Arthur became a prison, this land belonged to the Palawa people, who lived there for thousands of years. The forest and coastlines hold traces of their presence, shell middens, tool sites, and a deep connection to the land that colonisation tried to erase. In 1830, the British turned Port Arthur into a timber station and then into one of Australia's harshest penal settlements. Convicts from Britain and Ireland were transported there as punishment, some for theft, others for serious crimes. They were forced to labour under brutal conditions, cutting and processing wood for export. The site became a symbol of colonial control, where Indigenous people were displaced and prisoners were broken. By the mid-1800s, Port Arthur housed over 1,100 convicts. It had workshops, farms, and strict isolation. Many prisoners never left. And by 1877, the convict era ended, but the site remained, eventually becoming a major heritage attraction. In 2010, it was recognised as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, honouring both its convict past and Indigenous heritage. Sits on unceded Palawa land, the stolen lives, both Indigenous and convict, whose stories are bound to the place, deserve to be remembered. And it was here in 1996 that a mass shooting unfolded, forever changing Australia's laws and its collective memory. Right, so let's get into Martin Bryant. I didn't know much about Martin Bryant. I was alive when this incident took place, this massacre, but I was very young, like 6 or something. So wasn't really aware of the nitty-gritty details. But when I started researching this topic, oh my good Lord, was I shocked at how much was missed and how much alarm bells Martin Bryant should have rang to the people around him. But I'm not going to get into it in the intro. Let's just dive right into Martin. By the way, this is my second solo episode. What do you think? I've got a new setup happening. I've got a teleprompter to read my script, okay? Don't think that I have an amazing fucking memory, because I don't. So I just wanted to make it engaging and create clips and shit. So on my solo episodes, we're going to make it a bit more profesh, because I know that some of you enjoy just getting to the fucking story, okay? So here it is. So the perpetrator of this horrible violence is Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant was born in May, same as me, unfortunately, but in 1967 in Hobart, Tasmania. He was the eldest child of Maurice and Carleen Bryant, growing up in Lena Valley with a younger sister. From early on, something wasn't right. Teachers noticed he struggled to focus in class. He acted out, fell behind academically, and couldn't connect with other kids. He was emotionally flat, impulsive, and detached. And his behaviours became more disruptive and concerning. He was transferred into special education at Newtown High School, where concerns about his development only deepened, which is interesting. At home, things were complicated. His mother, Carleen, worked at a chocolate factory and later became a printmaker. She seemed devoted but overwhelmed, and I can relate to that. His father, Maurice, was dealing with financial stress and depression. The household was tense, unstable. There was no real structure, no real support for a kid who clearly needed it. So with an emotionally absent and a physically absent father, Martin's emotional issues only deepened. Didn't help in 1993 that Maurice Bryant was found dead in a dam on his family's property in Copping, Tasmania. The circumstances were deeply unsettling, and this is where the story gets suspicious. Maurice was discovered face down in the water, about 3 metres deep, with a diving way belt around his neck and body. A note had been left on the door saying, "Call the police." When divers recovered his body, the coroner ruled it a suicide. But I don't know about that. That seems strange AF to me. Just quickly, here's my take. I don't think someone who had killed themselves would have written, "Call the police." I don't think they would want to, if they wanted to die, they would want to make sure that the first attempt was the best attempt. Yes? That's what we say in nursing. But yeah, and why would you want to sort of disrupt that process if it's what you truly, truly want? You know what I'm getting at here? Anyway, but here's where things don't add up. Martin was at the property that day. Neighbours reported that Martin told them his father was down at the dam before the body was officially found. They also noted that Martin seemed unusually calm, even happy, following his father's disappearance. There's also evidence suggesting Maurice wasn't a strong swimmer, which makes drowning an odd choice. And the way belt, there's a deliberate, calculated method. It requires specific equipment, knowledge. There was evidence suggesting that Maurice wasn't a strong swimmer, and you can take that either way, I suppose. On one hand, it could be a pretty effective method to make sure that you don't reverse this attempt, right, if it's intentional. But on the other hand, if someone knows you, who is familiar with you and recognises that you are not a good swimmer and they want to kill you, that may be what they would choose to fly under the radar. So it's interesting. The diving belt is strange too. Apparently that was Martin's. So I've seen various sources saying that it was Martin's, but cannot confirm. So we'll just leave that there as alleged. The way belt, the note, Martin's presence, his strange demeanour, it all raised eyebrows and questions. Was it really suicide, or was there something more? The coroner's ruling closed that case, but the suspicion lingered. And here's the kicker. This death occurred just a year after Martin inherited wealth from his friend Helen Harvey, a woman who would play a crucial role in his story. So let's talk about Helen. When Martin was 19, he met Helen Harvey while doing handyman work, lawn mowing and odd jobs around her property. Helen at the time was 54, wealthy, eccentric and isolated. She lived in a decaying mansion filled with cats and dogs, the definition of a crazy cat lady, am I right? But over time, Martin became more than just her handyman. He became her constant companion. Helen spent lavishly on Martin. She bought him over 30 cars, that's 30. She invited him to live with her, which was weird. The relationship was bizarre and intense. Nothing like a typical friendship between a teenager, essentially, and a woman in her 50s. It's a bit of a power dynamic there. While it was never officially confirmed as a sexual relationship, people who knew them described it as deeply inappropriate. And honey, I could tell that from just the story and the age difference. Helen did allegedly have an intellectual disability as well, which would clear up a few things, really. But Martin had an IQ of 66, and the 35-year age gap made the power dynamic deeply troubling. This was exploitation, plain and simple. But from what side? Maybe from both sides. My question is, where the fuck were the parents when this was going down? Come on, if my son's 19 and he's dating a 54-year-old or whatever the fuck she was, no, absolutely not. That's not happening. You're not moving in with her. She's your employer. Highly inappropriate. Kind of weird, don't you think? Do you really want to be living with someone like that? Question the choices at the very least, but there's no mention. There is zero mention of the parents having any real conflict with Martin regarding this. So Martin's cruising. He's living his best life with his, his sugar mama. But in October of 1992, it took a turn again when Helen and Martin were in a car together and it veered into oncoming traffic. Helen died instantly in the crash and Martin survived with serious injuries. It was said that he spent up to 10 months in hospital with injuries. I mean, that's something to survive a head-on collision. But how the hell did she end up driving into oncoming traffic? The disturbing part is that the neighbours, particularly one man named Barry Featherstone, iconic name, testified that Helen had mentioned to them Martin's habit of lunging for the steering wheel while she was driving, grabbing it to cause near misses for amusement. She allegedly warned him that, quote, "One of these days, the little bastard is going to kill me," end quote. Yeah, okay. Concerning. Anyway, despite these reports, Martin was never charged. And shortly after Helen's death, he inherited her entire estate. Approximately $550,000 in 1992 money. Okay, guys, I looked it up. That's equivalent to $1.2 million today. I will take a sugar mama too, if that's what I'm getting. I wouldn't make her steer into oncoming traffic, allegedly. But, I'll take the 30 cars. I've got mouths to feed, Do you blame me? I'm going to sign up to Seeking after this. We're getting the jokes out now because shit's about to get real serious, okay? So just let me do this. Let me get it out of my system because the dark humour is going to end up offending someone, all right? Despite these reports, Martin was never charged, and shortly after Helen's death, he inherited her entire estate. He went from being a struggling handyman to a wealthy man, all while living with his mother in isolation. 2 deaths, 2 inheritances, 2 very convenient outcomes for Martin Bryant, and that's what we're left with, convenience. To understand what happened next, we need to look at Martin's clinical profile. After his arrest, psychiatric assessments revealed a complex picture. His IQ was measured at 66, placing him in the bottom 1 to 2% of the population. Functionally, he had the emotional and cognitive maturity of an 11-year-old. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which explained his social deficits and obsessive behaviours. School assessments showed conduct disorder. He had a history of torturing animals and bullying younger children. Now, there's a myth that Martin had schizophrenia. His mother mentioned it at one point, but forensic experts clarified that he didn't have a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. Instead, he suffered from severe personality disorders and intellectual impairment. He lacked empathy. Survivors described his eyes as quote-unquote dead, which is terrifying. These are traits associated with antisocial personality disorder. The key points: his low IQ often concealed the predatory nature of his actions. People dismissed him as just a disabled kid, much like Ed Gein. But beneath that disability was something darker, a lack of conscience, an inability to feel remorse, and a growing sense of grievance towards people he believed had wronged him. So the years leading up, 1992 to 1996, after inheriting Helen's wealth, Martin had money but no structure. He never held down a steady job. He lived with his mother. He became increasingly isolated and his behaviour grew more erratic. He drank heavily, became obsessed with firearms, allegedly stockpiling weapons. In the years between Helen's death and 1996, something was building inside of Martin. He was grieving his father's death, or perhaps not, and was dwelling on something darker. He was isolated despite having money. He felt wronged by people around him. The owners of the Seascape Guest House had rejected his offer to buy the property. That rejection festered. He was fixated on perceived slights, nursing resentments that grew more intense with each passing day. By 1996, Martin Bryant was 28 years old, living in Newtown, a quiet suburb of Hobart. He was known locally as the odd guy with the intellectual disability, but beneath that surface he was becoming increasingly dangerous. He had access to firearms, he had money, he had resentment, and he had no one watching him. closely enough to see the danger building. So this is the grisly part, and I just want to give you a trigger warning. Mass murder, I guess, in detail. Proceed with caution. But these victims' stories deserve to be told, and we need to show Martin for who he actually is. So, April 28, 1996, the massacre begins. On the morning of April 28, Martin Bryant woke up and decided to change Australia forever in a bad way. Bryant drove to the Seascape guest house, the place that had rejected him, the place that had fueled his resentment for years. He used an L1A1 SLR rifle and immediately murdered David and Nolene Martin, the owners of Seascape. They never saw it coming. At around 12:35 p.m, a couple called the Millers stopped at Seascape looking for accommodation. Bryant met them outside, acting rude and telling them his parents were away. They left, luckily, feeling uneasy. If they'd stayed longer, they'd probably be dead. Always trust that uneasy feeling. Always trust your gut. By 12:45 p.m, Martin locked the Seascape property, taking the keys and some of the Martin's own weapons. He got into his yellow Volvo and began driving towards the Port Arthur historic site. He had a plan, he had weapons, and he was ready. Bryant entered the Port Arthur historic site after paying the entry fee. He initially parked in a restricted area, but was asked to move by security. He moved his car and then walked into the Broad Arrow Cafe. He ordered a meal, a roast beef roll and juice, if you were wondering. He sat on the deck and ate. He talked to tourists about the lack of wasps. He appeared nervous, regularly looking back toward the car park and into the cafe. He was waiting, he was preparing, but he was calm. At 1:27 p.m, Bryant finished his meal. He re-entered the cafe and took a Colt AR-15 out of a blue sports bag. At 1:28 p.m, he fired the first shots. The cafe was small and crowded. Tourists were eating, talking, enjoying a quiet afternoon at a historic site. Bryant began shooting with clinical efficiency. His first victims were Mo Yi and Su Leng, sitting at a table next to him. They died instantly. In approximately 90 seconds, Bryant fired 29 shots and 20 people were killed. 12 were wounded. Most victims were shot at close range in the head or upper body. Bryant exhibited no hesitation, no remorse, no emotion. He was in a quote-unquote flow state, a predatory zone where his low IQ seemed to disappear and something far more dangerous took over. The planning, the preparation, and the accuracy. 1:30 p.m. to 1:40 p.m, Bryant targeted the gift shop and car park. He exited the cafe and entered the adjacent gift shop. He killed several more people here, including the shop manager. Then he moved to the car park. In one of the most tragic moments of the entire tragedy, Bryant encountered Nanette McCack and her two young daughters, Alana, 6 years old, and Madeline, who was 3, who were attempting to flee. He killed all of them. I just had to take a moment because I just got full body chills. A mother and her babies gone in seconds. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of confusion. This was calculated murder or a psychosis. But I know which one I believe. Bryant then fired at people hiding behind tour buses, killing several more. The car park became a shooting gallery. People were running, screaming and dying. At 1:40 p.m, Bryant drove his Volvo to the site's toll booth. He encountered a gold BMW carrying 4 people. He killed all 4 occupants. He moved his weapons and ammunition into the BMW, abandoning his Volvo. He was adapting, he was thinking, he was continuing. At 1:45 p.m, Bryant drove the stolen BMW to a nearby service station. He killed a woman named Zoe Hall and abducted her partner, Glenn Pierce, forcing him into the boot of the BMW. He now had a hostage. He now had leverage. At 1:50 p.m, Bryant drove back towards Seascape. Along the way, he fired at passing cars, wounding several more people. He was on a rampage, but it was controlled. He knew what he was doing and where he was going. At 2 p.m, Bryant arrived back at Seascape with his terrified hostage, Glenn Pierce. He forced Pierce inside and handcuffed him to a stair rail. He had murdered 35 people in less than 2 hours. Now he was going to make a stand. Police arrived at 2:10 p.m. and the first shots were exchanged. Bryant began a standoff that would last 18 hours. Police arrived at 2:10 p.m. and the first shots were exchanged. He communicated sporadically with the police negotiators. He claimed to be, quote-unquote, Jamie, and made various demands. During the night, though, he murdered Glenn Pierce. At 8 a.m. on April 29th, Bryant set fire to the Seascape guest house. He ran out of the building with his clothes on fire and was captured by police. The siege was over. The massacre was over. But 35 people were dead. So that was heavy, but what happened at Port Arthur was not random. It wasn't the act of a man with schizophrenia or a psychotic break, in my humble opinion. It was calculated, tactical, and terrifyingly efficient and planned. The planning for a person with an IQ of 66 just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not an expert. I am a nurse. My specialty is anaesthetics and recovery, not IQ, but it doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Experts, let me know. It just seems very fucking convenient that 2 people died around him prior to this. In suspicious circumstances, strange, and things didn't add up. But anyway, what do I know? The transition from the AR-15 used in the cafe to the L1A1 used at the Seascape and the car park shows a tactical awareness that contradicts his low IQ, in my opinion. The kill ratio in the Broad Arrow Cafe, 20 dead from 29 shots, is higher than many of our trained soldiers. This suggests a high degree of focus and flow state during these initial minutes. His behaviour immediately before the massacre, eating a meal, talking to tourists, and after negotiating as Jamie, suggests a profound ability to dissociate from his actions. He could compartmentalise clearly. He could separate the murderer from the person ordering a roast beef roll. Somehow. Despite a documented low IQ, his proficiency with multiple high-powered weapons suggests a tactical competence that defies simple categorization. This apparent contradiction points to a profound dissociation where he could engage in seemingly normal behaviour moments before committing horrific acts. His ability to achieve such a high kill ratio indicates a predatory flow state where internal inhibitions were completely absent, and that made him incredibly dangerous, regardless of whether he was faking his low IQ or not. How could you fake that your entire life? I don't know, maybe just to get out of school? It's hard to say. But I have questions. Oh, I have questions. And tragically, the years of animal cruelty and manipulative behaviour that preceded this event were clear, unaddressed, and were an unaddressed red fucking flag to everyone around him that should have picked that up. But it was a time where mental health awareness was not a thing, or was just starting to be a thing. The system failed. The people around him failed. The warning signs were there and no one stopped him. So let's talk about the aftermath. Martin Bryant is now serving 35 life sentences with no possibility of release, thank goodness. He will die in prison, but the impact of what he did extends far beyond his cell. Australia's gun laws changed dramatically following Port Arthur. The government implemented near-total bans on automatic and semi-automatic firearms. Licensing requirements became strict. Buyback programs were established. Port Arthur became a turning point in Australian history, a moment when the nation said, never again. But the real legacy is the 35 people who died and the 18 who were wounded. It's the families who lost loved ones. It's the survivors who carry the trauma. It's the nation that had to reckon with the fact that this could happen here in a quiet, historic site on a sunny afternoon. The story of Martin Bryant isn't just about one man's mental illness or disability. It's about a perfect storm, a child who never received proper support, a family in crisis, suspicious deaths that were never fully investigated, a relationship that was deeply inappropriate and exploitative, and a system that failed to see the warning signs. It's a story that changed Australia forever, and it's a story that reminds us 30 years today why we need to pay attention to the people around us, especially the ones who seem broken, isolated and angry, because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone has written off as harmless. Martin Bryant was written off and 35 paid the price. So what's been going on with the mental health care system? It's all very well to discuss gun laws and how that was a pivotal moment in our history, but I want to know what they did about mental health services. So to set the scene, Martin Bryant wasn't just evil, he was a massive systemic failure. His intellectual profile indicated an IQ of approximately 66, placing him in the borderline intellectual disability range, equivalent to an 11-year-old. He was also diagnosed with what was then called Asperger's syndrome, now known as autism spectrum disorder, along with conduct disorders. His psychiatric history included frequent contact with mental health services from childhood, with teachers noting his tendency to torture animals and his being distant from reality, despite clear warning signs, including instances of threats of violence where he had stated, quote, "I'd like to go around shooting people," end quote. I beg your pardon? No one took that seriously? That is not okay. Or something you just let slide as a bad day. It's easy to say they mustn't have given a shit, but I feel they must have found him too difficult because they lacked education and training. Despite the threats of violence, no formal homicide risk was ever flagged to police or licensing authorities. His father, it seemed, protected him from the consequences of his actions. A significant turning point came in 1992 when his eccentric friend Helen Harvey passed away, leaving Bryant with that inheritance, which would be $1.25 million today. The critical gap here was that while a guardianship order was eventually placed on his assets due to his diminished intellectual capacity, there was zero community supervision for his actual behaviour. He subsequently spent this fortune on 14 overseas trips and amassed a massive arsenal of guns. So what did Port Arthur expose then? The Port Arthur Massacre pulled back the curtain on a fragmented and primitive mental health system in Australia. It starkly exposed the lack of supervision for individuals like Bryant, a man with a significant intellectual disability and a history of erratic behaviour, living completely unsupervised in the community. Australia was grappling with the consequences of deinstitutionalisation. While large asylums had been closed, the necessary community support structures to care for individuals like Bryant had not been adequately built. He effectively fell between the cracks because he wasn't deemed mad enough for a locked ward. He was too complex for a general practitioner to manage effectively. The system was plagued by information silos. State by state, mental health systems did not communicate, and gun licensing managed at the state level had no link to mental health records, whether state-held or private. Crucially, there was no safety net like the NDIS. Disability support was a lottery, heavily dependent on the state of territories individuals reside in. So what were the direct reforms to mental health tied to Port Arthur? We'll go through the gun laws. So, in response to the massacre, beyond the immediate focus on gun control, Port Arthur also spurred significant changes in mental health policy. While the National Firearms Agreement of 1996 famously banned semi-automatic weapons, it also crucially introduced mandatory mental health checks for gun licenses. This was a direct, albeit gun-related reform with mental health implications. The strategy also accelerated the push for a truly national mental health strategy. The second National Mental Health Plan, introduced in 1998, shifted focus towards high-prevalence disorders like depression and anxiety and initiated the move towards more community-based care models. So what's changed since then? So we've had 30 years of reform from 1996 to 2026. This has seen major milestones that have shaped the mental health system. So in the year 2000, Beyond Blue was founded by Jeff Kennett, playing pivotal roles in transforming mental health from a shameful secret into a national conversation. In 2001, the Better Outcomes in Mental Health Care initiative was introduced, marking the first time general practitioners were genuinely incentivised to develop mental health plans for their patients. A significant game changer arrived in 2006 with the Better Access initiative, under which Medicare began funding psychology sessions. This democratised access to therapy, but also inadvertently created a massive private market for mental health services. Also in 2006, Headspace was established as a national youth mental health foundation, recognising that 75% of mental health issues emerge before the age of 25. The rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme from 2013 represented what many consider the Bryant fix. This scheme provides individual funding for people with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, which includes mental health conditions. It's also now supporting over 600,000 Australians, with approximately 64,500 participants with a primary psychosocial disability as of late 2024. It's a problem, a significant one at that. The fifth National Mental Health Plan in 2017 focused on integrated care, aiming to foster better collaboration between state and federal governments. A massive health check of the system came with the Productivity Commission Mental Health Inquiry in 2020. Its findings revealed that the system remained patchy and was costing the Australian economy over $200 billion a year. More recently, the National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Agreement in 2022, a $3.8 billion landmark deal between the federal and state governments, aimed to address the missing middle. Individuals who are too unwell for a GP, but not sick enough for hospital admission. That was me the other day when I had a kidney infection query, ? Just got antibiotics and I just called it a day. They sent me the wrong ones initially and I was like, nah, fuck no, this is potential pyelonephritis. Got on the telehealth, I'm a nurse, just send me this. And they were like, okay, I'm fine now, on the mend. Not getting worse. Anyways, recent updates from 2023 to 2026, particularly in the 2024-25 federal budget, shows a massive focus on workforce development, including more psychiatry training places and an emphasis on digital mental health services, offering free low-cost apps and portals. Specific funding in 2025 has also targeted the significant 30% gap in rural psychiatry. I grew up on the rural side of the country and fuck all mental health services. Lots of mentally ill youth. So what is still broken? Because something is. People are still killing people. People are still killing themselves. Despite these reforms, several critical issues persist. The missing middle remains a significant problem. If you're not in an acute crisis, but a 10-session Medicare plan isn't sufficient, because it rarely is, you often find yourself without adequate support. There is a chronic shortage of forensic mental health beds, leading to situations where individuals who should be in hospital are instead in prison. Access remains a majority challenge, and particularly in rural and remote areas. For someone in Dubbo or Darwin, the wait time for a psychiatrist can be anywhere from 6 to 12 months. The interface between the NDIS and the broader health system also presents gaps, with hospitals and the NDIS frequently disputing who is responsible for funding a patient care, leaving vulnerable individuals stuck in bed block for extended periods. Don't I know it? Furthermore, people with a dual diagnosis, an intellectual disability like Bryant and a mental illness, often fall between the cracks, being deemed too complex for many services. The honest verdict: did Port Arthur fix it? Fuck no. The honest verdict is no. Port Arthur did not fix Australia's mental health system. However, it unequivocally ended the era of ignorance. We transitioned from a system characterised by out of sight, out of mind, to a massive multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to mental health. Or is it? To close, a one-liner that encapsulates this journey: in 1996, we had a system of silos. And in 2026, we have a system of bridges. Those bridges still don't quite reach the other side. Thank you for being here. I'm Sandra Saleh. Fix our mental health system now, please, or people will continue to die. That was the most research I've ever done with the help of AI. Thank you, AI. I switched my AI to Manus. Thank you, Manus. ChatGPT. You've been fired. Anyways, well, that's it, ladies and gents. Thanks for listening to Nurse Ratchet. Again, I am Georgia. Kait, can find me on TikTok, Instagram. You can follow the Nurse Ratchet podcast on Instagram. And if you want to support the show, head over to Patreon and join us as a suspect. Sit in the interrogation room or go all the way to the gallery for exclusive content and direct access to behind the scenes and early episodes. You can also find us on Instagram for case photos and updates. And if you have a case you want us to cover or a recommendation, send it to us via email or DM on Instagram. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the darker side of survival and true crime. What did you think? Did you like this? Did you like this version of recording? I'm loving the fucking teleprompter, I gotta say. I feel like a full-on news reporter. I feel like Sandra Sully in her heyday. Anyways, until next time, my friends.